Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be playing with the new pop-up wiper Die-namics, and I'm also going to be using the new Fairy Good Friends stamp set to dress up our card. But I wanted to show you first this die set. So it has 3 pieces. You have this little kind of weirdly shaped rectangle piece, and then we also have a long wave piece and a long grass piece. And these are actually super long, so you're going to be able to create landscape cards and create a continuous stretch of either grass or waves to create either an underwater or just a grassy scene. So you can see here I've die cut this just to show you. This is a landscape card and it measures all the way across 8.5 inches. So this die is going to be able to cut you a very long border if you want to create a card in this orientation. For my card design, I'm going to be doing a portrait style card, so I'm not going to be using either of the longer dies here. I just wanted to show you how long they actually are so that if you want to be able to create landscape, you know that that's an option. But since I'm using the Fairy Good Friends, I wanted to create kind of a cloudy scene and have it look like they're kind of flying up in the sky. So I'm going to use the Stitch Cloud Edges Die-namics, and I'm going to use that one to create our little pieces here, and it's going to fit perfectly onto the portrait style card. So I am going to be using that little rectangle piece to create the pop-up wiper piece, and then I have a bunch of cardstock pieces here that I've already die cut. So I have my pre-cut cardstock pieces. This is the main card base and it measures 5.5 inches tall by 5 3/4 inches wide. I have another piece here that is also 5 3/4 inches wide, but I only have it cut so that I can be able to cut that cloud outline out of it, so it's only like half the size of the 5.5 inch. I think when I die cut my clouds, this panel ends up to be about 2.5 inches in height. And then I have one more smaller piece here, and that is 4 1/4 inches wide, and I'm going to use that to cut an additional cloud piece that we can use to do a little bit of layering. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut out the cloud outline from my 2 smaller pieces of cardstock, and I'm also going to cut out one of the rectangle pieces from another piece of white cardstock. Once I have everything die cut, we can go ahead and start to work on the background first, and then we can put everything together to create this really cool interactive card. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my cloud detail to my background piece. So I haven't done any scoring on this piece yet at all. It's completely flat, and that's just going to allow me to get a really nice smooth ink blend across the entire panel. So I'm using my Cloud Edges stencil, and I'm using Peacock Feathers Distress ink, and I'm just adding the clouds onto this background. I'm adding quite a bit of ink here because I really want the clouds to stand out, but you can go a lot lighter if you prefer your clouds to be a little bit more white in color and not so blue. This stencil is really great for this kind of design because it's plastic, so the ink slides right off of the stencil onto your panel. And you can go either direction. You can go from top to bottom or bottom to top. It just depends on what you prefer. You're going to end up with pretty much the same effect either way, so just kind of do whatever feels natural to you. Now for the other 2 cloud pieces here that I've die cut, I'm also adding a tiny bit of ink just on the edges of those just to give them a little bit of contrast when I layer everything together. Okay, so now we need to do some scoring on our main panel, and this is what's going to allow us to create the really cool pop-up wiper motion to kind of reveal our image that's hiding down from the clouds. Okay, so I just flipped my panel upside down. You want the score lines on this card base to be on the right-hand side, but since I'm using the left-hand side of my scoreboard, I just flipped it upside down to do the score lines. And I'm scoring it at 3/4 inches and 1.5 inches. And that's going to give me 2 score lines, and each of the sections that I've scored are going to be 3/4 inches wide. So now we need to score the cloud piece as well, and for this one we need the score lines to be on the left-hand side. And since I have that bumpy cloud texture at the top, I couldn't easily put it into my scoreboard. So I flipped this one upside down horizontally, and I'm going to do the exact same score line. So I'm at 3 1/4 inches and 1.5 inches. So now we have 2 different cardstock pieces here. We have the die cut clouds with score lines on the left-hand side, and both of those score lines are at 3/4 inches. We also have the large background piece here with the inked clouds, and those score lines are going to be on the right-hand side. So for the cloud piece, we're going to fold the first score line on top of itself, and then we're going to fold the second score line backwards, and then we're going to use a bone folder and really crease those folds. You want everything to crease really nicely, so that's going to help your card lay flatter when we have it completely closed. And then for the larger piece there, we're going to flip that back around so it's the right way, and then we're going to fold that first score line over onto itself, and then fold the other little score line there back to make kind of like a Z fold. Once again, I'm using my bone folder to really press down on those creases, which is just going to ensure that everything closes nicely when we put the card together. And then once we have both of these scored and folded, I'm going to go ahead and just show you how these layer together. So you can see I have that foldy piece on the right hand side, I have the foldy piece on the left hand side of the clouds, and these are going to layer exactly like this so that when the card is closed, it's completely A2 size, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. But then when we pull on the two sides, it's going to open it up and lift that cloud, and we're going to have our little fairy pop up from out of there. So that is what we're going to work on now, the actual little piece here that creates the pop-up wiper. So I've die cut the little rectangle piece that comes with this. There is 2 score lines added to this little piece. One of them has a little arrow on it, and that is the side where we're going to adhere our little character. So we need to fold the 2 score lines, and what we're going to do is we're going to use our bone folder once again to really crease these. These ones we want to fold really nicely since they're going to move a lot when we open and close the card. So the little end here that I folded is the end that doesn't have the little arrow etched in it. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of showing you how it will adhere to the inside of the card. So I have my little cloud piece upside down because we're going to adhere this little piece into that little fold there. And this is going to fit perfectly into that 3/4 inch space. This is the smallest you can go to create the pop-up wiper, but you can go larger since this will fit in any larger area. I have a small piece of acetate here that I've cut. It's just a strip of acetate that's going to hold our character. And then I have my little fairy that I've already stamped and colored. She's going to disappear behind the clouds when the card is closed. And then when we open the card, she's going to magically pop up. So the first thing we need to do is add her to the acetate strip. So I've added a small piece of score tape to one end of that acetate. And I'm just going to add this to the back of our die cut piece. So I've just adhered that on there, so now she's attached to that acetate piece, and that's going to allow her to be able to pop up, and you're not going to see the acetate. Once I have that on there, I'm going to go ahead now and add another piece of score tape, and this time I'm adding the score tape to the back of the acetate piece, and that's because we're going to adhere this to our little die cut piece that we have here. So once again, just a reminder that I'm going to adhere her on the side that has the little arrow etch on it, and that's going to kind of adhere right on the side here. And then what I'm going to do when I have her adhered is I'm going to add more adhesive on top of that acetate piece. I'm going to press that on really well, and then I'm going to fold this over. And what that's going to do is it's just going to really help to secure this in place and make sure that she kind of doesn't accidentally get pulled off of the card. Since this is interactive and she's going to kind of have a lot of movement, this is just a little bit of extra assurance that everything is going to stay adhered together. So now you can see I have her sandwiched in between that little piece, and the other end is going to line up perfectly with the side of that little scored piece that we're going to add it to. So I'm adding adhesive to the back of this. I'm making sure I don't have any kind of showing over the sides. And then I'm going to line this up right along that score line. You can see there it fits perfectly, and I'm going to press down really well. And you can see when I fold that cloud piece over, it makes that little rectangle piece kind of fold over on itself, and she disappears in behind the clouds. Now I did have her a little bit too high on the acetate piece and she wouldn't have fit in behind that cloud panel, so I did very carefully remove it and adjust her so that she fits in behind there. So now we have our cloud, she's attached on there, and we have the back piece here that we're going to add the cloud piece to. So what I like to do is add adhesive to both sides. So I'm going to add a little bit of adhesive to the back of the cloud panel, and I'm also going to add it to the very right hand side of that back piece. I'm going to make sure I don't have any of the adhesive going past the score line. We just want it on the side there. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to add adhesive to the back of the clouds, and then I'm going to adhere this together onto the background. I like to start on the left-hand side, and I just line up that first piece there, press down really firmly, and then I'm going to lay everything flat so that I can adhere the second side. So once I have that firmly pressed down, I just kind of push everything down so it goes flat, and the other side is going to line up perfectly and adhere together. Okay, so once I have that done, we have created the interactive portion of our card, and we have our pop-up wiper that brings our little fairy character from down in behind the clouds up into the top of the sky. And I'm just going to show you here from the top and the bottom. When you have the card closed, you can see that she fits nicely in that card area. So you just want to make sure anything that you're using isn't too tall to fit in that space. So you can see she fits nicely in there, and then when I lift or pull on the two sides and it lifts the clouds, she pops up from behind there. So just a really cool interactive way to have some movement on your card. So now I have some more of the little fairy characters. There's 3 in total in the set, so I decided to use all 3 of them. And once again, I've already stamped and colored them just to save a little bit of time. And I also have a bunch of the little butterflies stamped and colored as well. I wasn't really sure what I was going to use on the scene, so I figured I would just stamp and color a bunch so I had a variety to choose from. And then I also have that little cloud piece that we created at the very beginning. I'm going to add adhesive to this and add this to the card first, and then we can go ahead and decorate it with the rest of the fairies. I decided not to put any foam adhesive on the back of this cloud panel just because we have quite a bit of dimension when we open and close the card. So I decided to put this on completely flat. And then once I have that in place, I can go ahead and add our little fairies and our butterflies. So what I want to do is kind of make it look like two of the fairies are meeting each other in the sky when we open the card. So I have the card completely flat so that the fairy that hides behind the clouds is completely popped up, and then I can kind of figure out exactly where I want to place that second one. Once I have her placement figured out, I'm just going to add liquid glue to the back of her, which is going to give me a few seconds to kind of get her in place before I have to really press her down. And then I'm just going to add her to the background of the card. And then once I have her in place, I'm going to add the other fairy girl into the clouds that we've added to the front of the card. So that's why I wanted to have another cloud layer just to add a little bit more detail since it is very white. But I wanted to have somewhere where I could tuck her so that she looks like she's kind of sitting down in the clouds. So I used liquid glue on her once again, and I just made sure not to get any on the back of her head area since that is overlapping the clouds. Next up, we need to add some sentiments to our card. So I decided to do 2 stamped sentiments that we're going to add to the top and bottom, and I decided to stamp them on steel gray cardstock versus black. I wanted to have the contrast of the darker sentiment strip with white embossing powder, but I thought the black was a little bit too dark, so I like the softer gray color that we're using here. So I took 2 sentiments from the stamp set and I stamped them onto our gray cardstock. I used Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky ink, and then I just added white embossing powder directly on top. I'm going to go ahead and heat set those, and I also die cut them with the Skinny Strips Die-namics. So I have one that we're going to add on the bottom of the card, and I have one that we're going to add on the top. So for this top one, I decided to trim it down so that it would fit in behind the score lines. I don't want it to be on top, I want it to be tucked underneath. And I just used liquid glue, and that's what I'm going to use to adhere it on so that I have time to kind of get it in place. So you can see here when I have the card open, it says to a very good friend, but when I have the card closed, you only see to a very good. So I just think it's kind of cute that the sentiment is just partially there until you fully open the card. Then for the bottom, I use wishing you a magical birthday, and I just cut off the edge of that as well so it would line up on the left-hand side of the card, and I adhered it directly onto those clouds. You can also see that I did adhere a couple of the butterflies already, so I have a green one that's in the main part of the clouds on the front, and then we have a yellow one there that's kind of tucked in behind when we have the card closed. And now when I pull this open, our fairy pops up and meets her friend in the sky, and we have the cute little butterflies showing as well. I ended up adding a third butterfly to the bottom area right above that bottom sentiment strip, and then I also used a white gel pen to add a little bit of detail to each of the fairies. So I dotted their cheeks, I added a little bit of highlights to their hair, and it just really adds to the overall look of the card, having that little bit of detail added to them. Once I had that done, I also dotted a few dots on each of the butterflies just to give them a little bit more detail as well, and then that is going to complete our card. So we used the new pop-up wiper to create this really neat interactive card where we have our little fairy friend popping out into the sky. It was super easy to create, and it is just a really fun, dimensional, interactive way to have movement on the card. I hope today's video gave you some ideas on ways to use the new pop-up wiper Die-namics. As always, I appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Thanks so much for watching.